LoveLore Library. She did not seem to care about what was happening, but her complexion seemed to be a little paler than before. Ning Xuema sighed inwardly. Ji Yunhuang had completely neglected this crown prince consort. He clearly had physical contact with her, but he could still be so cold. No wonder it was said that men's sex and love could be separated. Now it seemed that it was true. She playfully patted Ji Yunhuang's shoulder. Brother Yunhuang, you're going to have a family soon. You can't pick up girls outside anymore. Xueqing is a good girl. Treat her better in the future. She smiled and walked away. Ji Yunhuang was slightly startled. Ning Xuema had already run to the stage to watch the competition. He turned his head to look at Tian Xueqing. The smile on his lips disappeared. Can you not keep following this prince? He really could not leave her now, but there was no need for her to follow him step by step like a shadow, right? Chapter 853. Ji Yunhuang's heart was vaguely irritated. He looked at the pale Tian Xueqing and coldly said, "Are you afraid that this prince will treat other women well?" Deliberately watching from the side. "Let this prince tell you, even if I marry you as the crown prince's consort in the future, you won't be my only woman." He was the crown prince and the future emperor. If there were no accidents, he would have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards in the future. Of course, if he could marry the woman he liked, that was an exception. Tian Xueqing's face became even paler. She took a step back and said, "Your Highness, Xueqing understands. Xueqing will not interfere with your matters. If that's the case, then don't keep following this prince." Ji Yunhuang turned around and left. Tian Xueqing subconsciously followed him for 2 steps and stopped. She did not know anyone around her. She had been raised as a medicine person since she was young. She was almost isolated from the world and was not good at socializing. At this moment, she was thrown into the crowd by Ji Yunhuang. Although the people around her were very polite to her because of Ji Yunhuang, she still felt lonely. She slowly walked out of the crowd and found a secluded corner to enjoy the scenery. "He is obviously your man, but you can only watch as he is taken away by another woman. Do you feel sad?" A voice came from behind her. Tian Xueqing turned around and saw a white-clothed woman walking over. Tian Xueqing's memory was very good. She recognized that this woman was one of the new disciples. Her name was Feng Jiasin, and her martial arts were very good. Other than Ning Xuema, her chances of winning the championship were also quite high. Feng Jiasin's words clearly had the intention to sow discord. Tian Xueqing glanced at her and did not say anything. Feng Jiasin sighed, "That woman is a vixen. She is especially good at seducing men. She is obviously someone's concubine, but she still has an unclear relationship with several men. Men are cheap. What they can't get is always the best. They don't look at a beauty like you by their side and only like to look at those wild flowers." Tian Xueqing faintly frowned and took a step back. She lightly said, "Sorry, I will not talk about people behind their backs. Miss Feng, I don't understand, and I don't want to understand." She turned around and walked into the crowd again. She didn't want to be alone with Feng Jiasin. Feng Jiasin was speechless. She had originally wanted to find an ally who hated Ning Xuema and find an opportunity to make things difficult for Ning Xuema. However, she did not expect that the other party would completely ignore her good intentions and leave just like that. She got snubbed and was a bit unhappy. Just as she was about to join the crowd, she raised her head and saw Yellow Jing and standing not too far away. She was lightly playing a bamboo flute in her hand and was looking in her direction. Her heart jumped. Although Yellow Jing An's position was high, he was handsome and elegant as jade. No matter where he stood, he would attract the attention of a large group of female disciples, and Feng Jesin was one of them. Her wishful thinking was to take the ancestor as her master and become martial siblings with Yellow Jing'an. When the time came, she would find all sorts of reasons to get along with Yellow Jing'an and think of a way to woo him. Then, they would return to the Fengyi kingdom to seize power. She had always thought highly of herself and felt that she was more than enough to be a match for Yellow Jing'an. Therefore, in the depths of her heart, she had already regarded Yellow Jing'an as hers. At this moment, when she saw him looking in her direction, she felt both nervous and excited. She was nervous because she was afraid that her words to sow discord between Tian Xueqing had been heard by him. She was excited because it turned out that he was still paying attention to her. Chapter 854. Feng Jesin subconsciously straightened her clothes and tidied her hair. Her posture was elegant, and she strove to make her every movement seem like a noble young lady. She then raised her head to look at Yellow Jing'an, but she discovered that he had already disappeared. She looked around and finally found him in another arena. Then, her eyes narrowed slightly. She clenched her fist. Yellow Jing'an was standing beside Ning Xuemo, talking to her. Ji Yunhuang and Helian Shao were also standing there. The four of them were watching the competition on the stage, talking and laughing. Feng Jesin. Hatred surged like waves in her chest. Why? Why was everyone so good to that girl? Her psychokinesis was obviously not as high as her, and her appearance was not as beautiful as her. Why was she able to gain the favor of so many men? Vixen. A standard coquettish vixen. Feng Jesin cursed in her heart. Today, she must defeat this coquettish vixen and completely blow off steam. Let these blind stinky men see that she, Feng Jesin, was the best in this world. No woman in this world could compare to even a toe of hers. The later rounds of the competition each had their own merits. It was also brilliant and varied, and the progress was also fast and slow. Fortunately, it was held in 2 arenas, so the progress wasn't too slow. The competition quickly progressed to the second round. This time, Ning Xuemo's opponent was an Earth Stage Level 3 disciple. Although this person's psychokinesis was higher than Ning Xuemo's, his array wasn't as proficient as Ning Xuemo's. In addition, his qigong wasn't as good as Ning Xuemo's. So after 10 minutes, he was completely disrupted by Ning Xuemo's strange footwork. His heart panicked, and he missed a step and fell down the ice cone. Ning Xuemo won again. Just like this, round after round of competition, the morning passed, and then the afternoon passed. Ning Xuemo also competed a few rounds. Although it was more difficult to win each round, she was still the one who won. If Ning Xuemo had broken through the 6 levels on her own, some people still suspected that someone had let her win. But now, after seeing her defeat her opponents again and again with various kinds of martial arts, everyone's impression of her had changed from being suspicious to being convinced. Originally, the people of the Sun-Moon sect were not particularly interested in the competition between new disciples. In previous years, apart from a few revered masters who wanted to take in new disciples, the others would come in 2s and 3s. After all, everyone was busy. Besides, how good could the new disciples be? In the eyes of these old birds, the martial arts of these newbies were not even worth looking at. There was nothing worth looking at. But this year was a bit special. Firstly, there were geniuses among geniuses like Feng Jesin and Helian Shao in this batch of new disciples. Secondly, there was suddenly an unexpected dark horse like Ning Xuemo. The fact that a former trash had passed 6 stages in a row had shocked all the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect. Her name had spread to every corner of the Sun-Moon sect overnight. They all wanted to see the true face of this dark horse. So early in the morning, the people who came to the Star Brilliance platform to watch the competition could be described as a sea of people, every time Ning Xuemo competed, there would be countless eyes watching and analyzing her. Ning Xuemo was someone who was used to seeing the wind and waves. No matter how many people stared at her, she would still be able to act as if nothing had happened and perform normally. And those little girls and youths who were fighting with her were under great pressure. With so many people watching, they were nervous and excited. They were excited because their skills would no longer be buried. They had finally become the focus of everyone's attention. Chapter 855. What made the new disciples nervous was that their opponent, Ning Xuemo, was too freakish. Her martial arts were even more varied, and she used different martial arts against different opponents. Sometimes, she used speed to fight speed, and other times, she defended motionlessly like a mountain. A sudden move was fatal. Her fighting style was not only novel to the new disciples, even those old birds of the Jianghu who had practiced martial arts for many years in the Sun-Moon sect were full of admiration. Trash. Those who said this girl was trash were simply blind. They couldn't be any more blind. In the evening, the top 6 of the finals were finally decided. Ning Xuemo was one of them. Ning Xuemo's opponent this time was the son of a general. He had followed his father on the battlefield since he was young, and had already fought with countless experts at a young age, so his battle experience was very rich. Psychokinesis, Earth Tier Level 3, Single Spirit Root, Metal Attribute. Ning Xuemo had seen him fight before. His moves weren't flashy, but every move and style was very practical, attacking the enemy's vital points. Although he wasn't old, his murderous aura was domineering. When his opponent was stared at by his cold eyes, their hearts would first tremble. At this moment, he was standing at the top of the icicle, his black clothes contrasting with his handsome face. He cupped his hands towards Ning Xuemo and said, "Please." His palms suddenly turned pale gold, and his body moved, like a ball of flowing light. He attacked Ning Xuemo. The cold and hard metal aura hit her in the face. Ning Xuemo spun in a circle, and her footsteps shifted slightly, avoiding his killing move. The two of them fought together. The higher the level of the competition, the more interesting it was. Especially Ning Xuemo's side, there was a sea of people watching. Experts were as common as clouds. When everyone saw this cold youth make a move, they knew he was extraordinary. Previously, when he fought with others, he didn't seem to be very outstanding. His moves were all normal, but this time, it was as if he had suddenly turned on a cheat. His movements were like lightning, his aura was like a rainbow, and his moves varied. He had obviously been hiding his true strength. Now that he was fighting with Ning Xuemo, he finally displayed all his abilities. Yellow Jing, and twirled the bamboo flute in her hand, her eyes landing on the youth. This youth was a talent. Yellow Jing and summoned Feng Liani and asked for all the information on this youth. This youth's name was Yi Xian, and he was from Xianming. He was the son of a general, and his father had died on the battlefield when he was 11 years old. He was the one who carried his father's body and fought his way out of the encirclement. He killed hundreds of people and was known as the little god of slaughter on the battlefield. After his father died, he managed the general's mansion all by himself. It was not easy for him. His experience was similar to Ning Xuemo's. The difference was that he had been a genius since he was young. He had even inherited his father's teachings. He was also highly regarded by the king of Xianming nation. Before he came to the Sun-Moon sect, he had already been conferred the title of Xian General by the king. He was one of the earliest to be conferred the title of general. After coming to the Sun-Moon sect, his results in the 6 trials weren't too outstanding. It was mainly because his skills and mechanisms were slightly weaker, which lowered his overall standard. His total score was around the 15th place. Added with the fact that he usually kept a low profile, the elders of the Sun-Moon sect didn't pay much attention to him at the beginning. It wasn't until now that everyone's eyes lit up. Yilu Jing and looked at his pale gold palms and nodded inwardly. Although this child's talent in psychokinesis wasn't the highest, he was definitely the one who was the best at fighting. He also used his metal-type psychokinesis to perfection. He leaped on the icicles, leaving uneven patches of pale gold in the places he passed. They were embedded in the icicles and sparkled under the starlight. Yi Xian stumbled on the ground and steadied himself. The numbness and itchiness on his body finally disappeared. He was safe and sound, but he had also lost. The spectating crowd was silent for a moment before erupting into cheers again for Ning Xuemo's victory. However, Yi Xian looked up at the young girl standing on the icicle with a conflicted gaze. He knew that the metal particles that Ning Xuemo had just shot back at him were poisonous, but the poison only had the effect of numbing and itching for a moment. It didn't actually hurt him. Also, she hadn't been unscrupulous when she attacked. At the very least, she hadn't whipped him off the icicle and allowed him to land safely so he wouldn't embarrass himself too much. Yi Xian had killed his way out on the battlefield, so every time he attacked, he didn't leave any way out for his opponent. Chapter 858. It was the same when he fought with Ning Xuemo just now. He'd already done his best, but he was still defeated by her. Yi Xian accepted his defeat wholeheartedly and also felt a faint sense of gratitude toward Ning Xuemo. He cupped his hands in salute. "Thank you." Ning Xuemo smiled at this lone wolf-like youth and also cupped her hands in salute. "Thank you for letting me win." At this time, the other two teams had also decided the victor. As expected, Helian Xiao and Feng Jiaxin each defeated their opponents and won. After going through this round of fierce battles, all three of them were very tired. However, according to the rules, the first place had to be decided among the three of them. That way, it would be convenient for the venerable emperor to accept disciples. The three of them still drew lots to determine the order in which they would go on stage. At this time, the two people who went on stage first would be at a disadvantage. The one who lost would be fine, but the one who won and stayed on stage would have to fight the third person, and the third person would have a big advantage because they could rest a little longer. So when Ning Xuemo drew the lot that would determine her battle with Helian Xiao first, she couldn't help but curse bitterly in her heart. God was her stepmother and had never treated her well. Feng Jiaxin was secretly pleased. She took a step back and leisurely watched the two people fight first. The stars in the sky were resplendent, and the crescent moon was like a hook. The crowd watching the battle was on the ground. It was already late, but no one had left. On the arena of icicles, Helian Xiao stood against the wind and looked at Ning Xuemo. "Xuemo, I'm sorry. I will do my best in this battle. I won't give in." Ning Xuemo smiled slightly. "I won't either." When competing in the arena, giving one's all is the greatest respect to one's opponent. Helian Xiao was relieved, and a trace of appreciation appeared in his eyes. "Thank you." This was a true opponent. A true opponent. Even if they called each other brothers outside the arena, they were opponents once they entered the arena. Everyone would do their best. No matter who won or lost, there would be no regrets. The two of them began to fight on stage. Helian Xiao had dual spirit roots of wood and water. Wood was the main attribute, and water was the secondary attribute. Ning Xuemo, on the other hand, had wood and fire dual spiritual roots. Wood was the main attribute, and fire was the secondary attribute. The two of them had the same main attributes, so this battle was very interesting to watch. Although they were both of the wood attribute, Helian Xiao's telekinesis was at the 5th level of the Earth realm, a full 3 levels higher than Ning Xuemo. Don't look down on these 3 levels. Once they started fighting, the difference in power would be huge. For example, Helian Xiao could casually condense green vine whips and ebony sticks. He could even make the green vines grow rapidly and quickly form a net to envelop people. In short, he could easily use anything related to wood. On the other hand, Ning Xuema had an Earth rank level 2 attribute, so the things she could casually condense were very limited. He could only form vine whips and wooden sticks, but not countless green vines at the same time. In this way, she would be at a disadvantage in the fight. If it was someone else who had Earth tier telekinesis level 2 or level 5, they would have no chance of winning. They would be PK'd in a matter of minutes. They would not be a match at all. On the other hand, Ning Xuema relied on her peculiar movements and moves to turn danger into safety time and time again. Although there were many people watching the battle below the arena, no one made any noise. They all held their breaths and watched the battle between the geniuses on stage. At this time, no matter if it was Ning Xuema or Helian Xiao, both of them had brought out all their skills, dazzling those experts who were watching the battle. Feng Jiaxin also stood below the arena and watched attentively. She was looking for the weaknesses of these 2 people's movements and tactics. Chapter 859. This was the advantage of making a move later. She could observe her opponent's fight to her heart's content to search for her opponent's weakness. When it was her turn to make a move, she would have a clear idea of what to do. Feng Jiaxin's main focus was still on Ning Xuema. She was most afraid of her, and the one she hated the most to step on was her. After an hour, Feng Jiaxin became more and more alarmed as she watched. She had already seen Ning Xuema's moves so many times, but she still couldn't find the pattern of her opponent's moves. It was ethereal, strange, and ever-changing. She had already made her move, but you couldn't guess what her next move would be. Although her psychokinesis was Earth stage level 2, she could display the power of Earth stage level 3 or 4. Moreover, the more she used it, the more abnormal her intuition was. In addition to her strange way of using it, it was simply impossible to guard against. Helian Zhao's psychokinesis was so high, but he was only evenly matched with her and didn't gain the upper hand. Looking at Ning Xuema's moves, Feng Jiaxin's heart was beating like a drum. She originally thought that when she almost lost to Ning Xuema when she was flying across Lotus Leaf Lake, it was because the other party just happened to know the layout of those lotus leaves, so she ran fast. If they really fought, Ning Xuema's actual ability might not be that strong. She might not lose to her. Now it seemed that even if she went up on stage and fought with her, she might not win. It could be said that there was an 80 to 90% chance that she would lose to her. If she lost to her again, Feng Jiaxin couldn't imagine it. This was a result she absolutely couldn't accept. So no matter what method she used, she had to win. She must win. Her fingers clenched the pill hidden in her sleeve and her eyes drooped. She would take this pill at the most crucial moment. Fight for a chance. Time slipped by as Ning Xuema and Helian Xiao fought, and then slipped by. Both of them made strange moves and brilliant moves. From time to time, there would be applause and comments from the audience. Although it was already late at night, the Star Brilliant stage was still bustling. This fierce fight lasted for more than 4 hours. Converting it to the current time, it was a full 5 hours. Until the next day at 1 a.m., the 2 finally decided the winner. Helian Xiao was defeated by a single move and leaped off the arena. When he landed on the ground, he staggered a little before regaining his footing and laughing heartily. Ha ha ha, this is great. How satisfying. I haven't fought to my heart's content in a long time. Then, he cupped his fists towards Ning Xuema on the stage. Xuema, I admit defeat to you. After fighting for so long, he was really tired. He walked 2 steps and sat down on a big rock beside him. he didn't want to get up again. It was clearly the beginning of winter, but he was drenched in sweat, and his forehead was sweating profusely. He wiped his face with his hand and looked at Ning Xuema on the stage. He was worried about her. After such a fight, a man like him was already so tired that his legs were weak and numb. Ning Xuema, a delicate little girl, must be even more tired, and she still had to fight Feng Jusin. Ning Xuema was at a disadvantage. On the contrary, Feng Jusin, that white lotus, took advantage of it. Ning Xuema was indeed tired, but more importantly, she was also hungry. After such a large amount of activity, she was so hungry that her chest was sticking to her back. But luckily, she was a secret agent. She had the word endure in her bones. No matter how tired or hungry she was, she could endure it. Of course, she was also tired. But in her past life as a secret agent, who knew how many times she had experienced this kind of battle? Chapter 860. She had once fought with someone for a day and a night. In the end, the other party couldn't hold on any longer and was killed by her. Of course, she was also paralyzed. After that incident, she slept like a corpse in her little nest for a day and a night. Today, she had fought a total of 5 matches. The last match was especially exhausting. She was so tired that she wanted to lie down and sleep. But her excellent agent qualities allowed her to act as if nothing had happened even if she was tired or hungry when she didn't complete her mission. She could also maintain a good mental state, making others unable to see any signs of fatigue. Even though her injured leg had been healed by the ancestors' spirit medicine, the recovery time was still very short. Once she moved vigorously, there would still be some pain. Her movements today weren't ordinary vigorous, so the pain in her leg was also aggravating. Standing on the icicle made her injured leg almost tremble. Although the light at night was very dim, the people present were all outstanding in martial arts. Their night vision was very strong. Even in the dark, there wasn't much difference from daytime. Feng Jiaxian's night vision was also very strong. Her eyes were fixed on Ning Xuema. She could even see the sweat on Ning Xuema's forehead. Her heart stirred. She didn't wait for the Sun Moon sect disciple in charge of the competition to announce the start of the competition. She had already flown up and cupped her hands towards Ning Xuema. She planned to say a few polite words before seizing the opportunity to start the fight. Yilu Jing'an suddenly spoke up from below the stage. The competition will be temporarily suspended for 2 hours. It will start again after 2 hours. Feng Jiaxian was stunned and blurted out, "Why?" Yilu Jing'an didn't even look at her and said indifferently, "Do I need to explain to you, a junior?" Her words choked Feng Jusin and made her speechless. Everyone nodded their heads one after another. Just now, the martial arts competition lasted for too long. The people on the stage had used up a lot of their energy. If they were to immediately start the second round, it would be too unfair to Ning Xuema. She would be able to rest for 2 hours and recover a little bit. Feng Jiaxian's wishful thinking fell through. She endured, but in the end, she couldn't. Lord Protector, the competition has a rule. When the last 3 people fight, they have to fight continuously. Isn't it too unreasonable to stop midway? Yilu Jing'an's gaze finally landed on her. Is there a rule in the competition that doesn't allow for breaks? Feng Jusin was dumbfounded. Indeed, there was no such rule. Yilu Jing'an's voice grew colder. Or is it to say that Miss Feng is eager to take advantage of this and fight with her while she's tired? This way you can win and be glorious. Feng Jusin's pretty face turned slightly red. Jusin doesn't have such thoughts. The competition this time is to select the true top talents, not just the results. Therefore, it's better to be a bit more fair to convince the masses. No matter who wins or loses, no one else has anything to say. Yilu Jing and added. At this point, Feng Zhesin had nothing to refute. She reluctantly jumped down from the ring. Ning Xuema also jumped down from the arena. Kirin immediately rushed over. Master, are you tired? Are you hungry? Lean on me. Another disciple who was in charge of the food rushed over with a food box. Miss Ning, this is the food prepared for you. Please eat some. Opening the food box, there were several side dishes and a bowl of porridge that was steaming hot. Miss Ning, you fought for so long and used up too much energy. I have an ice heart fruit here that can relieve you a little. A Sun Moon sect disciple handed over a purple-red fruit. Even if there were no illegal items, it would be easy for people to criticize them. At this time, Ning Xuema naturally did not want to leave a topic for others to gossip about. She was about to refuse. Yilu Jing and walked over. These things will be examined by someone. With a wave of his hand, he called over several alchemists and had them examine the food separately. Alchemists were a very special existence in the Sun Moon sect. Their level of alchemy was also one of the best in the entire continent. No medicine could escape their inspection. Two alchemists quickly examined those things and cupped their hands towards Yilu Jing and, Martial Uncle, these things are very normal. There are no illegal items. Yilu Jing and glanced at Feng Jia Axian and had people divide the food into 2 portions, saying, send 1 portion to her. Do you think that the person who scolded me behind my back isn't despicable? She looked down and smiled. Everyone, do you think that a person who only dares to use telepathy to curse others but doesn't dare to admit it is filthy? Filthy. The meddlesome disciples of the Sun Moon sect below answered in unison. Feng Zhesin's face was no longer green and red, it was almost green with fangs. She leaped up, and a long sword quickly formed in her palm. She directly attacked Ning Xuema. Why bother about those gossip? Let's fight. She didn't want to argue with Ning Xuema anymore. She was no match for her, and she would only embarrass herself. Chapter 863. She only wanted to defeat Ning Xuema completely and step on her under her feet, and then humiliate her. Of course, if she could pretend to accidentally kill her in the process of the competition, that would be even better. Once and for all, it would be the most appropriate method. The two of them fought on the ice cone ring like a revolving lantern. Ning Xuema had actually observed Feng Zhesin's matches several times. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, then you can win 100 battles. So when Feng Zhesin was fighting with others, she had also watched a few matches and had already figured out her martial arts. Of course, she also knew that Feng Zhesin must have some tricks up her sleeves for this final moment, so she was also on guard. Since she had figured out Feng Zhesin's martial arts, Ning Xuema naturally practiced the method to deal with her in her heart. Feng Zhesin had the dual attributes of metal and earth. Earth gave birth to metal, and metal was the main attacking attribute. And her secondary attribute was also helpful to the metal attribute. It could be said that her dual attributes were the most beneficial and complemented each other. She was indeed a martial arts genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. And Ning Xuema had the dual attributes of wood and fire. Wood gave birth to fire. If she used the fire attribute as her main attacking attribute, then her wood attribute would be very helpful to the fire attribute. But now her main attacking attribute was wood, and the fire attribute was not beneficial to her at all. During the fight, she could not even use the fire attribute, so as to prevent it from burning the wood attribute. Now the two of them, Ning Xuema used the wood attribute to attack, and Feng Zhesin used the metal attribute to attack. Metal restrained wood, so if Ning Xuema used the attribute to attack, she would be at a disadvantage against Feng Zhesin. What's more, the opponent's psychokinesis was higher than her by 2 levels. So Ning Xuemo had already formulated a strategy to deal with her. She simply ignored all the attribute attacks, and took out 2 short swords to attack with her inner strength. After her psychokinesis had increased, her inner strength had also increased a lot. She poured her inner strength into the swords, and the 2 ordinary short swords had a few feet of sword light bursting out. Wherever it passed, it almost cut through the air. Every move he made had the power of a thunderbolt. Feng Jessen was simply #####. Her brain was in a mess. She had watched so many of Ning Xuemo's matches, but she had never seen her use this kind of kung fu. She thought that Ning Xuemo would use the vine whip, but she didn't expect that she would take out 2 ordinary short swords. However, these 2 short swords were very powerful. When they collided with the sword she condensed with the metal psyche power in the air, they made a harsh sound, which made her wrist numb. The palm of his hand that was holding the sword hurt. In fact, using telekinesis to attack was a bit similar to a mage's attack in a video game. It was more beneficial than close combat. It focused on the cultivation of telekinesis rather than the improvement of the overall physical quality. In other words, they had high ATK and low HP. Once someone got close to him, he would be at a disadvantage. After all, no matter what kind of spell he used to attack, he would still need time to form hand seals and recite an incantation. This might be a short period of time, but as long as he didn't encounter a true melee attacker, the weakness of this attack wouldn't show. However, Ning Xuemo was not only good at shooting in his previous life, but she was also very good at close combat. She rarely met a worthy opponent in close combat. In this life, because she was called a trash in telekinesis, she paid extra attention to the cultivation of her inner strength. Later on, although she also cultivated telekinesis, she didn't give up on her inner strength. The 2 types of power in her body were considered to be advancing together. When her inner strength reached a certain level, she could still walk on the waves without leaving a trace when she cultivated Qin Gong. When she fought, she could turn everything around her into her weapon. 2 hours passed. Another hour had passed. The sky in the distance was already turning white, and the dawn was about to break. Feng Jessen was so tired that she was sweating profusely. Her sword had also been shaken to the point that there were countless cracks on it. Fortunately, her sword was condensed using psychokinesis. Once a crack appeared, she could quickly use psychokinesis to repair it. Otherwise, it would have already been broken by Ning Xuemo. However, with the passage of time, the psychokinesis in her body began to dry up. When the long sword was knocked out again, it was extremely difficult for her to repair it. She had never fought with anyone for such a long time, and she had never met such an opponent who did not play by the rules. Ning Xuemo's overbearing and imposing way of fighting made her afraid and apprehensive. At the same time, it also made her angry and resentful. It was clear that her psychokinesis was high. It was clear that the psychokinesis of her attribute could restrain the opponent's psychokinesis. However, she was suppressed and beaten without any strength to fight back. She was angry, she was angry, she was angry, she was angry. The tip of her tongue finally licked the medicinal pill that had been pressed under her tongue. Chapter 865. Feng Jessen originally didn't want to use this pill. After all, it was given to her by an unknown person, and it happened to be an emergency, so she was more cautious. That was why he had been using a spell to keep the pill under his tongue and not touch it. But now, if she relied on her own ability to lose, it would be a matter of time. She couldn't lose, she wasn't willing to lose. Since she would be defeated sooner or later, she might as well take a gamble. She steeled her heart and used the tip of her tongue to pull out the pill and swallowed it. After a moment, she felt her whole body surging with heat. Her originally tired and sore body actually became lively again. All the discomfort gradually disappeared, and the psychokinesis in her body increased again. Ning Xuema originally estimated that she could completely force her out of the arena after dozens of moves, but she didn't expect that after dozens of moves, she found that the opponent's psychokinesis, which was about to be exhausted, actually increased rapidly. Buzz! The long sword in Feng Jiaxin's hand that was about to be broken by Ning Xuema suddenly doubled in size. Silver light circulated on it, like lightning flashing non-stop. Ning Xuema, accept your death. Feng Jiaxin shouted loudly. Her long sword flickered and transformed into a mountain of swords, smashing down on Ning Xuema from head to toe. The wind was fierce, and the lightning on the sword mountain was circulating, almost blinding people's eyes. Yilu Jing, and who was watching the battle below, had a huge change in expression. Earth rank level 8. Feng Jiaxin actually used the killer move that only Earth rank level 8 could use. When this move was used, the surrounding air was completely distorted by the strong psychokinesis wind. Even the white clouds in the sky were affected by this psychokinesis, desperately surging wind, clouds, and thunder. In the blink of an eye, a lightning struck down. Caw! A loud sound was heard, and half of the solid ice cone arena was blasted by the sudden lightning. The sword mountain spun in the air and moved quickly towards Ning Xuema. That threatening murderous aura almost cut everything in this world. Paw paw paw. Ning Xuema's wood protection psychokinesis barrier was like a fragile piece of glass as it was directly cut apart by the murderous aura of the sword mountain. Ning Xuema couldn't dodge the attack even after using several body movements. She gritted her teeth and decided to use the sword in her hand to block the attack. Chi! Before the sword in her hand could even touch the edge of the sword mountain, it had already shattered into a pile of scrap metal. If Ning Xuema had not retracted her hand quickly, her arm would have been swallowed up by the sword mountain. All of this seemed to take a long time to describe, but in reality, it happened in an instant. This sudden change happened too fast, so fast that the audience below the stage could not react in time. Because the two people on the stage were in the middle of a fight, even if the others were anxious, they couldn't interfere. Only Kirin's voice was almost hoarse. Master, be careful. At this moment, the difference in strength between the two of them was too great. Ning Xuema had not only failed to block the attack, but her blood and chi had also been shaken to the point that she almost spat out blood. She had no choice but to quickly retreat. She had forgotten that half of the ice cone arena had already been destroyed by the lightning, and there was a big crack. Her retreat just happened to step on that crack. She stepped on empty air and fell down. That crack was created out of thin air, so it wasn't very big. After Ning Xuema fell down, she was stuck in the bottom crack. She was about to jump out, but the sword mountain had already ruthlessly pressed down on her. Obviously, it wanted to thoroughly mince her into minced meat. Chapter 866. Although it was said that swords and sabers had no eyes, it was inevitable that someone would be seriously injured or even killed. But once someone was forced off the stage, it meant that they had won. After winning, only Feng Jiaxin could be so ruthless. Stop! Yilu Jing and shouted loudly, his voice like thunder. At the same time, he also flew onto the stage and raised his hand to chop at the sword mountain. But the sword mountain was pressing down on the fissure, and most of it was within the fissure. Yilu Jing and thunderous palm only caused the peak of the sword mountain to shake, but didn't change its downward momentum. Xuema. Yilu Jing An's voice changed. The ancestor had entrusted Ning Xuema's safety to him. If something happened to her at this time, how could he face his master? But the sword mountain was falling too fast, and the crack was very narrow. The top of the crack was filled with the sword mountain. Even if he wanted to jump down to save her, he couldn't find a gap. His face was pale with fright. He was about to jump into the sword mountain recklessly, risking serious injury to shatter the sword mountain when a white shadow suddenly flashed over. At the same time, the white shadow raised his palms, and a faint white light rushed into the sword mountain. The sword mountain that was spinning down suddenly seemed to be attracted by something, and in the blink of an eye, it melted like snow and disappeared without a trace. All of this happened too fast, in just a moment. Yellow Jing and was stunned, looking at the white-clothed ancestor who flashed over. You. Was this person fake or real? The fake ancestor hated Ning Xuemo, so he shouldn't be able to save her in time. But it was hard to say. After all, the fake ancestor didn't dare to let Ning Xuemo die, or else he wouldn't be able to explain himself. The ancestor's thunderous anger wasn't something anyone could withstand. Yellow Jing and looked at the white-clothed ancestor in a daze, and didn't react for a moment. Most of the people below the stage didn't know that there was a fake ancestor, so when they saw him appear, they all bowed down. Ancestor. The ancestor floated on the edge of the broken ring. His white robe was particularly dazzling in the dark night. His expression couldn't be seen clearly under the white jade mask. He didn't even look at the crowd below the ring. Instead, he flashed and jumped directly into the crack. Yellow Jing An's heart also skipped a beat. Just now, the huge sword mountain had almost completely filled the crack. Although the ancestor had made the sword mountain disappear, was Ning Xuemo, who was stuck in the crack, injured. Is she alright? If she was fine, Dizun wouldn't have jumped down, right? Yellow Jing and hastily took 2 steps forward and rushed to the edge of the crack. When she looked down, her expression changed. It was a mess inside the crack. She only needed to grab hold of that sharp stone protruding half a foot out of the cliff. It would not be too late for her to use her qigong to fly up. Ning Xuemo's body inched closer and closer to the cliff. Just as she was about to touch the cliff, a shadow suddenly appeared above her. She looked up instinctively and her expression changed. It was a person flying down. His speed was like a falling meteor. His fluttering white clothes were exceptionally dazzling, and his white jade mask was shining with a faint luster. Venerable Sovereign. It was actually a venerable sovereign. In the blink of an eye, he landed beside her. With a wave of his sleeve, he grabbed the vine whip in her hand. Bastard. This small tree could no longer bear any more weight. She was afraid that if an egg was placed on it, this small tree would break. This bastard did it on purpose. He wanted to kill her completely. Ning Xuemo was so scared that her face turned pale. Chapter 868. However, Ning Xuemo had obviously underestimated the other party's strength. The man had indeed grasped her vine whip, and his body was suspended there like a weightless leaf. He was on par with Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo stared at him vigilantly. Was he trying to use this opportunity to negotiate with her? If she didn't agree, he would only need to pull the vine whip slightly, and she would fall again. If she fell to her death, others would only think that she had accidentally fallen, and no one would suspect the fake Dizun. Her life and death was really in his hands. Ning Xuemo had already analyzed the pros and cons in her mind. She knew that this was not the time to be stubborn. She didn't wait for him to speak and immediately said, "I lost. So don't worry, I won't take the Dizun as my master anymore." The white-clothed Dizun was about to reach out to her, but when he heard her words, his hand paused in the air. He looked down at Ning Xuemo, his eyes unfathomable. There was a way. Ning Xuemo continued, I know that you have tried to make things difficult for me several times because you don't want me to take the Dizun as my master. Now that I have achieved your wish, why do you still want to kill me? The white-clothed Dizun paused. Did I make things difficult for you? His voice was slightly lower, as if he was closer to the real Dizun. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She almost thought that the person in front of her was the real Shinjioli. However, it shouldn't be, right? How could there be such a coincidence? She looked up at him. Amidst the mountain wind, the small tree swayed again. 2 more tree roots were broken. Ning Xuema was shocked and immediately said, Okay, you didn't make things difficult for me. I didn't want to take the Dizun as my master. You should be relieved now, right? Damn it, her life was the most important thing now. Everything else was fleeting clouds. The Dizun's eyes deepened. If you don't want to take me as your master, who do you want to take as your master? She had never wanted to take this fake as her master, okay? This person was addicted to pretending to be an emperor and thought that he was a true emperor. At this time, Ning Xuema naturally didn't want to bicker with him over this. She only wanted to dispel his killing intent. She immediately said, actually, Yelu Jing and isn't bad either. His martial arts are high, his personality refined, and he has patience. I'll take him as my disciple. She had already lost anyways and was considered second place. She could freely choose her master, so she chose Yelu Jing and that person would be a good master. His disciples were also very famous on this continent. Dizun, Yelu Jing and is he as good as this lord? His tone was somewhat cold. This time, Ning Xuema answered without hesitation, of course. Of course Ning Xuema was better than this fake venerable emperor. Yelu Jing and had been helping her both in the open and in the dark, but this fake overlord was always making things difficult for her. He wished he could torture her to death. The ancestor was wearing a cold jade mask, so Ning Xuema couldn't see his expression. She could only see that his eyes were as deep as the cold stars. Crack! 2 more roots of the sapling broke. Ning Xuema panicked. She glared at the person above and didn't bother to beat around the bush. Hey, what do you want? Just say it. Don't tell me you want to kick me out of the Sun Moon sect. If I really kick you out, will you agree? The ancestor's voice deepened. If she didn't agree, she was afraid that she would immediately die. Ning Xuema looked at the bottomless abyss below her feet and gritted her teeth. Did you give me any other choice? The ancestor was silent for a moment. When did I make things difficult for you? Tell me about it. Chapter 869. Ning Xuema threw caution to the wind and said, You really want me to say it? Of course. Everything. The ancestor didn't hold back either. All right. Ning Xuema had a stomach full of anger. She immediately said, You made me go through the levels alone in the maze illusion realm and almost died under the claws of the Yazi beast. You deliberately made things difficult for me. I risked my body to get out of the maze illusion realm with great difficulty, but you made me pass 6 levels in 12 hours. You even made things difficult for me at every level. In order to eliminate me, you didn't hesitate to hide in the dark to help Feng Jiasin. In the 6th level, you plotted against me and made me unconscious. If I didn't wake up in time, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to pass the 6th level. Is this considered making things difficult for me? Just now, Feng Jiasin's strength suddenly increased by nearly 2 times. Do you dare to say that you didn't play tricks behind the scenes? The ancestor's eyes darkened. You were injured by the Yazi beast. He suddenly slid down. The green vine shook slightly, scaring Ning Xuema so much that she screamed, Don't move. The ancestor's body suddenly stopped moving. He held the green vine with one hand and was half a body's length taller than her. He didn't stay close to Ning Xuemo, and there was an arm's length between them. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath. I know. Ning Xuemo, am just a small shrimp in your eyes. You can easily kill me. Don't worry. I won't tell anyone that you are a substitute. I will also keep the matter of you making things difficult for me in my stomach and won't mention it to anyone. She was still too weak now. As the saying went, an arm couldn't twist a leg. She wouldn't risk her life to expose his identity. That wouldn't benefit anyone. She would be silenced. If the fact that the ancestor had a substitute was spread out, it would definitely be a reign of terror. It would also bring countless troubles to Shinjuli. Ning Xuemo. The ancestor slid down another inch and grabbed her hand. Caw! That small tree couldn't withstand his repeated attempts to break the delicate balance. Finally, he succeeded in snapping it. Ning Xuemo screamed as she fell down. This bastard. She had already lowered herself so much. I've already promised him so much, but he still won't let me go. She even wanted to fall to her death. Just as she was about to desperately adjust her inner breath to stabilize her falling momentum, she heard the sound of wind beside her ear. Her waist was tightened, and she was already in someone's arms. Her body suddenly froze. She smelled that familiar, faint cold fragrance. Her heart raced as she raised her head abruptly. Di-soon hovered in the air with her in his arms, looking down at her. You little fool. Since you know that I have a substitute, can't you tell the difference between the real and the fake? He was real. Chapter 870. Ning Xuemo didn't know that the food she had eaten for the past few days contained rare medicinal herbs that could rapidly increase a person's psychokinesis without causing any harm to the human body. However, if she was a good-for-nothing and didn't have a high level of comprehension, those medicinal herbs were still useless. Only when the two were combined could they bring out the best in each other. You don't have to say anything else. Xuemo, do you still want to acknowledge me as your master? The ancestor stared at her. Of course I do. Ning Xuemo replied without hesitation and paused, but, according to the rules, you should accept the strongest as your disciple and I lost just now. Thinking of this, Ning Xuemo wanted to clench her fist again. She obviously shouldn't have lost. No, you didn't lose. Shinjuli spat out 4 simple words and added, let's go up. He carried her and leaped up, his body like a cloud floating upwards. Ning Xuemo laid in his embrace and smelled the unique fragrance on his body. Suddenly, she felt incomparably at ease. It was only at this moment that she felt her whole body was so tired and sore that she felt like she was going to be crippled. She didn't have any strength left. He carried Ning Xuemo and ascended at a very fast speed, but she didn't feel a trace of the cold wind in his embrace. It was very obvious that he used a technique to block the cold wind. When they were about to fly up the Star Brilliant stage, Ning Xuemo heard Feng Jusin's excited voice that almost changed pitch. I won. I won. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but look at Shinjuli. Shinjuli raised his hand and rubbed her hair. Be good. Then do you still want to accept the strongest as your disciple? Ning Xuemo couldn't help but ask. Of course. Shinjuli answered naturally. As they spoke, the two had already flown up the Star Brilliant stage. The Star Brilliant stage was somewhat chaotic. Ji Yunhuang, Helian Shao, and the ancestors' 5 disciples, these people were searching everywhere for Ning Xuemo's whereabouts. Feng Jusin had already sunk into a state of madness like Fan Jin. She stood on the collapsed stage and laughed like a madman. I won, I won. I'm going to become the ancestors' disciple. I will be the ancestors' only female disciple. No, you lost. A cold voice suddenly sounded, as cold as ice. instantly suppressing Feng Jiasen's slightly shrill laughter. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound and saw the ancestor slowly ascending from the bottom of the cliff with a person in his arms. We pay our respects to the ancestor. Everyone knelt down. Ji Yunhuang was in the middle of picking up the debris. When he heard this sound, he raised his head. Not only did he see the ancestor, he also saw Ning Xuema in his arms. He was overjoyed. She jumped out of the crack, even forgetting to kowtow to her grandmaster. She was so happy that she forgot her manners. Xuema. This is great. She was fine. Great, she's still alive. When Ning Xuema heard his shout, she couldn't help but look at Ji Yunhuang and was shocked. Ji Yunhuang stood there. His originally white jade-like hands were scratched in many places because of the rubble and wood chips. Blood was dripping from his hands. His silky smooth hair was somewhat messy and his robes were torn in many places. It was poles apart from his usual image. Heavens, I haven't seen him for a while. How did he become like this? Ning Xuema had just glanced at Ji Yunhuang when her head was gently turned by someone, causing her beautiful face to stick to his chest. She could no longer see the scene below. Ji Yunhuang's shout was quite loud, and everyone present could hear it. However, when he finished speaking, he felt a pair of icy eyes looking at him. Chapter 871. This gaze seemed to have a physical form, causing Ji Yunhuang to instantly shiver. He finally remembered the proper etiquette and hurriedly knelt down. Disciple has been rude, greetings to the ancestor. Feng Jiasen, who had been laughing like a madman on the stage, also came back to her senses and knelt down on the stage. She finally shouted out the greeting she wanted to call, Master, Jiasen greets you. However, before she knelt down, a gust of wind blew towards her, causing her to stagger backwards and almost fall off the stage. A cold voice said faintly, "This ancestor will not accept you." The voice was cold, but in Feng Jiasen's ears, it was not inferior to Zhao Lei. She suddenly raised her head, even forgetting the rule of not looking up at the ancestor. Why? This disciple won until the end. The ancestor did not have the intention to talk to her directly. He only ordered Yilu Jing and sent someone to check what medicine she used. Yes. A moment ago, Yilu Jing and was busy looking for Ning Xuema and didn't have time to pay attention to Feng Jiasen. Now that she heard the ancestor's order, she immediately complied and signaled to the 3 pharmacist disciples from the pill house. The 3 pharmacists walked towards Feng Jiasen. Feng Jiasen's expression changed greatly. She suddenly retreated. This disciple relied on her own ability to win and did not use any medicine. You can't check me. I'm a girl, I can't let a man check me. She was now an Earth Stage Level 8 psychokinesis. The 3 pharmacist disciples' levels were not as high as Feng Jiasen, so they could not get close to her. Yilu Jing and faintly frowned. He raised his hand and without seeing how he did it, a transparent light wave shot towards Feng Jiasen. Feng Jiasen only felt her legs tighten as if they were bound by something and could not move. She was shocked. She did not expect that her high psychokinesis would not be able to block one move from Yilu Jing and. Seeing the 3 pharmacists walking over, she finally could not help but cry out, "Forget it, if you don't want me to be first, then I won't be first. I'm willing to be second, this way you should be satisfied, right?" Yilu Jing An's face was heavy as water, ignoring her clamor. He didn't speak, but those 3 pharmacists naturally wouldn't stop. They stepped forward and grabbed her arm. Feng Jiaxian's face was already as pale as a ghost, and she suddenly burst into tears. "I know you don't like a commoner like me, no matter how hard I try, it won't work. You know that I'm all alone and don't have any backing, so you bully me as much as you want." The crowd didn't expect that she, who usually acted like a noble, would shout like a little shrew. They were stunned for a moment. Clearly, she was the one who was reaping what she sowed. Yet, from time to time, she would accuse others of bullying her. It was as if her identity as a commoner had become her shield. Ning Xuemo wanted to laugh when she heard Feng Jisen's clamor. She had seen many shrews, but this was the first time she had seen someone as strange as Feng Jisen. You can't touch me. I'm a pure and innocent girl. If I'm touched by you stinky men, how can I get married in the future? Feng Jisen's screams almost pierced through the clouds. She dared to be so arrogant in front of a venerable sovereign. Everyone was sweating profusely. What was the saying of the ignorant being fearless? This was it. It was probably the first time Shinjiuli had encountered such a strange person. He faintly shot a glance at Yelu Jing and immediately made a move. With a wave of his sleeve, Feng Jisen finally shut up. Only her pair of eyes kept rolling around, her face alternating between green and white. Chapter 872. The pharmacist didn't use any special method to check Feng Jisen's body. One of them put a finger between her eyebrows, and the other two checked her pulse. After a moment, the three of them let go at the same time and reported to Dizun, this girl took Tian Shuiwan an hour ago. As soon as he said this, everyone was shocked. The people present were all experienced and knowledgeable people. They naturally knew Tian Shuiwan, the continent's most taboo forbidden drug. Its effect was similar to modern stimulants. Of course, stimulants couldn't compare to its effect. In a short time, it could almost double the psychokinesis in the body. But this effect could only last for 2 hours. After 2 hours, the psychokinesis in the body would be greatly depleted. It couldn't be recovered even after several months. It would also cause great damage to the body. It was listed as the continent's first forbidden drug. This pill hadn't appeared in this continent for hundreds of years. No one expected Feng Jisen to use it. No wonder she was able to unleash such ferocious attacks all of a sudden. It was because she had eaten this. It seemed she was really unscrupulous in order to win. Everyone was talking about it and looked at Feng Jisen with some disdain. Yelu Jing stretched out her finger to open Feng Jisen's sealed acupoint. Her voice was cold. What else do you have to say now? Feng Jisen was still young after all. She didn't know much about pills and didn't know what Tian Shuiwan was. Hearing Yelu Jing's question, she still wanted to argue, I'm innocent. Jisen didn't know what Tian Shuiwan was, and didn't expect to take this. Someone must have seen Jisen's high martial arts and was jealous, so they deliberately framed Jisen. Before Jisen and Miss Ning fought, Jisen ate her food. There must be something strange in the food. Poor Jisen didn't know and mistakenly fell into a trap. These words were obviously directed at Ning Xuemo. She vaguely said that in order to frame her, Ning Xuemo deliberately drugged her. She also threw caution to the wind. She looked at Ning Xuemo, who was still lying on Dizun's body. Her eyes flashed with resentment. Miss Ning, I know I don't have a high status like you, and I don't have a strong background like you. Why do you want to frame a lonely girl like me? I'll give you the first place. Don't go too far. Ning Xuemo had truly opened her eyes. This girl's Zhu Beiji's ability to play the blame game was truly exquisite. She didn't want to argue with this kind of person. Talking to this kind of person would only make her mouth dirty. So she just smiled and didn't say anything. Yelu Jing simply wanted to facepalm. He had come into contact with all kinds of people, but he had never come into contact with a shrew. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with this woman. The three pharmacists couldn't stand it. One of them sneered, "What nonsense are you talking about? You ate your meal 2.5 hours ago, and you took your medicine 1 hour ago. It was obviously eaten during the fight. Who can give you pills during a fight? His words made Feng Jusin choke. She took a step back and couldn't refute. This, she steeled her heart and decided not to admit it. I remember now. During the fight, I unintentionally took a deep breath, but I didn't know where a pill flew into my mouth. I was caught off guard and swallowed it. How could I know what Tian Shuiwan was? It must be someone who wants to frame a girl like me, who has no background, and doesn't want me to get the first place. Chapter 873. This kind of reason was simply strange. How could she think of it? Ning Xuema simply wanted to praise her. However, this kind of reason was too far-fetched. It was obvious that she was treating the Sun-Moon sect's people as fools. The onlookers felt angry and amused at the same time. They looked at Feng Jusin with disdain. Yellow Jing and suddenly smiled and said indifferently, Feng Jusin, your psychokinesis is indeed a genius, but your character is strange. Do you think the Sun-Moon sect is a place where you can spout nonsense? Guards. 2 disciples of the Sun-Moon sect's punishment hall came forward and bowed, waiting for orders. Yellow Jing and said, immediately investigate the origin of this Miss Fang's pills and give an explanation to the innocent people who were splashed with dirty water. Yes. The disciples of the punishment hall stepped forward and subdued Feng Jusin without saying anything. One of them slapped her in the middle of her back. Another person placed a finger on her temple. Feng Jusin screamed. Her eyes rolled up, and her body swayed for a moment before returning to normal. She was bewildered. She looked at one and then looked at the other. You, what do you want to do? The 2 disciples of the punishment hall seemed to be afraid of dirtying their hands. After casting their spells, they immediately let go of her and each took a step back. One of them said, Feng Jusin, where did your pills come from? Feng Jusin originally wanted to quibble, but her mouth suddenly didn't seem to listen to her. She immediately replied, last night, a black-clothed man gave them to me. What kind of black-clothed man? His back was facing me, so I couldn't see his appearance. However, his figure was tall and straight. He should be a handsome man. Feng Jusin replied. Feng Jusin was about to go crazy. These were the secrets in her heart. She shouldn't have said them out loud, but she couldn't control her mouth. She answered every question, and all of it was the truth. You didn't know who the other party was, yet you dared to take his pills. Aren't you afraid that he would harm you? I'm afraid, but I want to win. I must win. I want to be the Empress of Fengyi country. I want Protector Yellow to notice me. I want to chase him into my hands and make him work for me. The people below were in an uproar. No one expected this little girl to have such grand ambitions. The Empress adopted her and treated her better than her own. Because of this, she lost her beloved daughter. Instead of repaying him, she wanted to usurp his position. There were also some who looked towards Yellow Jing and it was hard to imagine what it would be like for this Sun-Moon sect's general manager to risk his life for this little girl. Feng Jusin really dared to dream. Yellow Jing and his usually gentle and handsome face had no expression at all. Being remembered by such a pervert made him feel a little disgusted. The 2 punishment hall disciples also wanted to laugh, but they knew that if they did, they would definitely be beaten up by head steward Yilui. Therefore, they remained expressionless and continued to ask, when did you take this medicine? An hour ago, I saw that I was no match for that little bitch, so I could only take a gamble. Now that the truth was out, Yellow Jing paused and asked, how did Feng Yunj die? Feng Yunj was the official princess of the Fengyi kingdom, the one who had jumped into the river. I ambushed her from behind, then pushed her into the river. This was Feng Jusin's biggest secret. Even if her teeth were broken, she wasn't prepared to say it. She didn't expect that she would involuntarily say it here. After saying this secret, her face was deathly pale. Chapter 874. Everything else was fine. At most, she would be expelled from the Sun-Moon sect for taking illegal drugs. With Feng Jusin's talent, she could still join other large sects and make a name for herself. But once this secret was revealed, how could the Empress of Feng country let her off? Yelu Jing and bowed to the ancestor and said, "Master, everything has been clarified. How should we deal with this girl?" The ancestor was too lazy to pay attention to this kind of person. If it wasn't for the fact that she wanted to scheme against Ning Xuema, he wouldn't even be bothered to listen to this nonsense. He didn't bother to look at Feng Jusin again and said indifferently, "This girl's character is inferior. Cripple all of her psychokinesis and send her back to Feng country." "Yes." Yelu Jing and agreed. With a wave of his sleeve, a faint silver light surrounded Feng Jusin. A moment later, Feng Jusin screamed and fell to the ground. What she relied on was her innate psychokinesis. Now that it had been crippled, what hope did she have? She opened her mouth to plead for mercy, but Yelu Jing and didn't want to listen to her clamor anymore. He simply sealed her mute acupoint and instructed the disciple in charge of recruitment, "Send someone to send her back to Feng country and hand her over to the Empress. While you're at it, report everything she confessed today to the Empress and let the Empress punish her." The disciple in charge of recruitment was a bit apprehensive because he'd brought in such a weirdo. Hearing such an order, he hurriedly agreed and escorted Feng Jusin away without any explanation. What awaited her was the Empress' revenge and severe punishment. The Sun-Moon sect didn't want to dirty their hands for such a woman. After everything was dealt with, Yelu Jing and knelt to the ancestor and asked for forgiveness. "Master, this disciple was negligent and let such a person in. Please punish me, Master." The ancestor's gaze swept over him indifferently. "Punish yourself with 20 lashes and kneel in Tianfeng Valley for 3 days." "Yes." Yelu Jing and kowtowed and accepted his punishment. After dealing with that black sheep, Ning Xuema won first place in both name and in reality. Everyone had witnessed her martial arts and was naturally very convinced. Di Zun's gaze fell on Ning Xuema, who was standing to the side and watching the bustling scene. There was a hint of a smile in his eyes as he asked, "Isn't it time for you to become an apprentice?" In fact, Ning Xuema had just struggled out of his arms not long ago. At this moment, looking at the ancestor sitting on the high seat, her heart suddenly felt uncertain. This great god's attitude towards her was really ambiguous. His every move was full of possessiveness, yet he still wanted her to be his disciple. She looked around again. Wasn't it supposed to be a grand ceremony to acknowledge a master? Shouldn't they be in some solemn hall, burning a few sticks of incense for their ancestors, praying and worshipping? Now that he had pulled out a chair from God knows where and sat there, she could become his disciple just because of that. Ning Xuema felt that this apprenticeship ceremony was a bit like playing house. It wasn't very grand. "What? You're not willing?" Di Zun rested his chin on his hand and looked at her lazily. Under the mask, his pair of black eyes gleamed. He looked extremely elegant and lazy. "I'm willing," Ning Xuema replied. Forget it. This was something she had risked her life to obtain. She didn't need to think too much about it. She secretly took a breath and knelt down in front of him. Disciple Ning Xuema greets Master. She respectfully kowtowed 3 times. After these 3 kowtows, she would no longer be his concubine, but his disciple. This was originally what Ning Xuema had been striving for, but now that she had achieved this goal, she faintly felt a sense of loss in the depths of her heart. Of course, the ancestor had never made such a perverted request to any other disciple, only Yellow Jing, and understood, but didn't dare to say it out loud. The ancestor once again swept his gaze across the audience. His gaze paused on the pale-faced Ji Yunhuang for a moment before he spoke in an indifferent tone, "You can all pay your respects to her." Aside from the 5 disciples of the ancestor, everyone present was either the ancestor's grand disciple or his grand disciple's disciple. There were even some grand disciples of his grand disciples. Now that Ning Xuema had become the ancestor's disciple, these people naturally had to call her martial aunt or martial granduncle. Everyone didn't hesitate and bowed down to Ning Xuema, martial granduncle. Martial granduncle, Ji Yunhuang also slowly bowed down. He was the ancestor's grand disciple, so naturally, he had to call Ning Xuema martial aunt. The ancestor continued, "Announce to all countries, sects, and families that from today onwards, Ning Xuema is my direct disciple." Chapter 876. Yes. Yellow Jing and agreed. With this announcement, Ning Xuema would be at the top of the world from now on. No one would dare to bully her or covet her qilin. No matter where she went, she would receive the grandest treatment. Naturally, Ning Xuema also knew what the ancestor's order represented. For a moment, she didn't know what to feel. In the future, she would be able to intimidate others. This was the first time she borrowed a man's glory. However, she would become stronger. In the future, she would rely on her own ability to stand at the top of the world. And not borrow other people's prestige. She inwardly sucked in a breath. Just as she was about to say something, a breeze blew by her side. The ancestor, who was sitting on the high platform a moment ago, had already arrived in front of Ning Xuema. He took her hand. "Let's go back to Sky Sound Peak." With a slight sway of his body, he disappeared from the high platform. Everyone. They looked at each other. The ancestor was actually holding a girl's hand. Heavens, the ancestor actually took the initiative to hold a girl's hand. Although the ancestor had just carried Ning Xuema up, everyone had automatically thought that the ancestor had a high style and didn't care about etiquette when saving someone. Although the ancestor had carried Ning Xuema for a while, everyone still felt that the ancestor cherished her too much and hugged and coaxed her for a while, but now, the ancestor had taken the initiative to hold the girl's hand. And in such an open and above-board manner. Everyone felt that this was a little subtle. Of course, no one dared to say it out loud. Not only did they not dare to gossip about the ancestor, it was also extremely blasphemous to even think about it. Only Ji Yunhuang, who was leaning on a big rock, had an unusually pale face. He was extremely intelligent and was born in the imperial palace. Since he was young, he grew up in a group of women. The brothers around him often went to brothels. Even if he didn't really like anyone, he still understood the feelings between men and women. The relationship between the ancestor and Ning Xuema was definitely not as simple as a master and disciple. Originally, he had heard that Ning Xuema had entered the Sun Moon sect, and that she and Han Shanhue had yet to consummate their marriage. His heart still held a glimmer of hope, hoping that he could win the heart of this beauty. He looked gentle and refined, but he was actually an extremely domineering man. He didn't like people easily, but once he did, he didn't want to let go. This time, he had already made up his mind to pursue Ning Xuema forcefully. He didn't want to care about those messy things anymore. He just wanted to marry her. Even with Tian Shuiqing by his side, he did not change his mind. He couldn't refuse Tian Shuiqing's marriage, but he could marry 2 women at the same time. When he ascended the throne in the future, one of them would be the empress, while the other would be the imperial concubine. It wouldn't affect anything. Of course, in his heart, Ning Xuema wanted to be his empress. Even if he made Ning Xuema the crown princess, he would still find a way to make Ning Xuema the empress after he ascended the throne, making her the #1 person in the harem. His idea was actually a very common idea in this era, and no one would criticize it. After all, this was a patriarchal society. It was normal for men to have 3 wives and 4 concubines in this era. If a man only had 1 wife, he would become a strange existence. Of course, this was only in the vast Sky Empire. The majority of men were like this. However, in the Sun-Moon sect, the disciples here were cultivating every day. Before they reached a certain level of cultivation, no one would even consider the matter of getting married. Chapter 877. But now, Ning Xuema had become the ancestor's direct disciple and Ji Yunhuang's martial uncle, so he did not dare to reveal this thought. Especially when he saw the subtle interaction between the ancestor and Ning Xuema, he felt that something was not right. Could it be that the ancestor also had feelings for Ning Xuema? He clenched his fists in his sleeves. Originally, he thought that even if Ning Xuema was angry with him, she still had a good impression of him. As long as he really held her hand, he would be able to keep her by his side. However, he did not expect that when he really wanted to look for her, she was already gone. Now, she was getting further and further away from him, so far away that he could no longer stand side by side with her. He stood there in a daze, his heart filled with unprecedented despair. "Your Highness, your hand is injured. Let this concubine help you deal with it." Tian Xueqing had silently approached him and finally could not help but speak up. "Scram!" Ji Yunhuang coldly shouted and flung Tian Xueqing's hand away. Tian Xueqing took a step back. She lowered her eyes slightly and her face paled. The crown prince, who had always been as cold as an immortal, actually cursed. This showed how bad his mood was. Her lips curled into a bitter smile and she did not speak anymore. At this time, no matter what she said or did, it would be wrong. She would not be able to gain his favor. It turned out that gaining a man's favor was so difficult. It turned out that even if she gave up everything, she was still dispensable in his eyes. Ji Yunhuang was annoyed. He left Tian Xueqing on the spot and strode away. She was surrounded by the bustling Sun-Moon sect disciples, but she felt lonely, lonely to the bone. She stood there in a daze, as if the whole world had abandoned her. This time, there were a total of 19 new disciples including Ning Xuema. The first 6 disciples chose their own masters. The next few disciples were taken in by other masters who wanted to take in disciples. They were all satisfied. Helian Shao also became Yilu Jing An's disciple. Yilu Jing An's first rule for him was that he was not allowed to think about the relationship between a man and a woman for 20 years. This made Helian Shao very depressed, but he could not say anything else. Ning Xuema was carried by Di Zun back to Tianyin Peak in the blink of an eye. The scenery on the Tianyin Peak was still the same, but Ning Xuema felt as if she had been away for a long time. When she saw the scenery here again, she felt a sense of familiarity. The thing she felt most at home with was the big bed in the side chamber. She was very tired. It was an extraordinary exhaustion. The day before yesterday, she had not only broken through the dark forest, but also passed 6 trials in a row. She had not really rested yet. Yesterday, she had fought several fierce battles in a row. For the entire day and night, she had been fighting. Even if she was made of iron, she still couldn't hold on much longer. Moreover, she had finally achieved her goal. The string that had been stretched taut in her heart was finally loosened. When she was brought back to Tianyin Peak by Di Zun, she almost couldn't open her eyes. Great God! No, Master, can I go and rest first? She felt that she could sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. When there's no one around, you can just call me by my old name. Shenjiuli held Ning Xuema's hand and strode towards his sleeping quarters. Okay. Ning Xuema was very obedient when she was not provoked. She was sleepy and in a daze. When she walked into the sleeping quarters, she finally realized that something was wrong. She looked around and paused. Something was wrong. This was not her side chamber, but Dizun's sleeping quarters. Chapter 878. According to Yelu Jinghan, without the ancestors' order, no one was allowed to enter this palace. Why did he bring her here? Ning Xuema was suspicious. The ancestor wanted to teach her here. Great God, I'm really tired and sleepy. Please give me 2 hours. I'll rest for 2 hours. Before she could finish her sentence, her body was suddenly lifted up by someone. She was startled and half drowsy. She subconsciously grabbed his clothes and said, "Great God, you." The ancestor looked down at her. His eyes lingered on her face and sniffed her hair. He frowned slightly and said, "You should take a bath." Ning Xuema was speechless. She really hadn't taken a bath for 2 days and 2 nights. She also wanted to take a bath, okay? Unfortunately, she couldn't spare any time for these 2 days. Now that the ancestor disliked her, her face turned red and she felt wronged. I also want to take a bath, but... Before she could finish her words, the ancestor interrupted her, "No buts. Since you want to take a bath, I'll take you to take a bath." He turned around with her in his arms. Ning Xuema felt the scenery in front of her suddenly change. When she woke up, she saw a natural hot spring bubbling with steam. Ah! A hot spring. It seemed that she hadn't soaked in a hot spring for a long time. Strange, she had also wandered around Tianyin Peak once, so why didn't she find this hot spring? Ning Xuema forced herself to look at the scenery around her. The hot spring wasn't small. It was as big as a small pond and was surrounded by large trees with fiery red leaves. The leaves looked like maple leaves, but they were much redder than maple leaves. They shone brightly like a raging fire at the top of the trees. These trees that surrounded the hot spring were reflected in the water. They were fiery red from top to bottom, as warm as the setting sun. Didn't the great god dislike the color red? Why did he make such a hot spring? However, she really liked the scenery here. Half of her drowsiness was gone. "Do you like it here?" Shinjioli stood on the shore with her in his arms. The red leaves fluttered around them, creating a picturesque scene. "Yes." Ning Xuema answered without hesitation. "It's good that you like it. Wash up here. You're as dirty as a little ghost." Shinjioli put her down and ruffled her hair. He continued to tease her, "Your hair is in a knot." Ning Xuema was speechless. She had not showered for 2 days and was sweating profusely. She did not have to be as dirty as a beggar, did she? She subconsciously looked at her reflection in the water. Her flower-like face was reflected in the water. Other than her slightly messy hair and wrinkled clothes, she was still beautiful. She looked at the ancestor again. His white robe was like snow, and his black hair was like satin. He was as clean and elegant as the pure white snow on the mountain, without a single flaw. His mask had been taken off, and his face was cold and handsome. At this moment, he was looking at her lazily, and there seemed to be a slight smile on his lips. "Why are you looking at me? You want to invite me to bathe with you?" Ning Xuema did not expect him to say something so immoral. The way he talked to her didn't change because of his identity. It was still the same as before. She coughed. "Master, you're joking. How would disciple dare to bathe with master?" "Master, please leave. Disciple wants to take a good bath." The ancestor looked at her for a moment and finally said, "Will you be shy if I'm here?" Chapter 879. Isn't this nonsense? Ning Xuema secretly rolled her eyes. What kind of girl would let a man stand beside her and stare at her while she was bathing? The ancestor pondered for a moment and looked at her with a faint smile. Is there anything on your body that I haven't seen? You even danced in front of me before. Why are you being awkward now? Ning Xuema was speechless. Can he not mention that? I didn't even know he was peeping, okay? Master. Ning Xuema deliberately emphasized the word master to remind him of their identities. Master, at that time. I was your concubine. Being seen by you. Well, it's reasonable. But now I'm not your concubine. I'm your disciple. Although master and disciple should be close, there are differences between men and women. It's better to avoid some taboos. Shinjioli looked at her for a moment. His eyes moved to the cinnabar mole on her forehead. Unexpectedly, he agreed very straightforwardly. Okay. He turned around and left. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. Watching his back disappear into the distance, she began to take off her clothes. It was already early winter. Although this place was close to the hot springs, the climate was still quite cold. Because she was sweating profusely, she didn't know how many times her clothes had been soaked through by her sweat. Now she really felt that her body was sticky. Since there was no one else here, she simply took off all her clothes. She didn't test the temperature of the water and directly jumped in. As soon as she jumped in, she immediately jumped out like a grasshopper thrown into a fire. Hot. 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 Damn, it was scalding her. The temperature of the water was at least 80 to 90 degrees. She felt that a layer of her skin was going to be scalded off. She hurriedly checked her body and was stunned. Her skin was still soft and snow-white. There were no traces of being scalded. What's going on? Did her kung fu improve? Or was there a problem with this hot spring? Ning Xuema approached the hot spring again. This time she learned her lesson. First, she tested the temperature of the water with her feet. The temperature was actually neither hot nor cold. It was just the right temperature. Was it just an illusion? Ning Xuema was originally tired and sleepy. She couldn't wait to take a bath quickly and immediately throw herself on the big bed to have a good sleep. She didn't expect to encounter such a strange thing while taking a bath. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She stood naked on the shore and felt rather cold. After thinking about it, she decided that it would be safer to take a bath in the water. This time, she didn't jump in. Instead, she looked at a rather shallow area and slowly entered the water. What she didn't expect was that when she put one foot into the water temperature was neither too cold nor too hot. But once she put both feet into the water, she immediately felt a strange burning sensation as if she had been electrocuted. She hurriedly retracted one of her legs and lifted it high above the water surface. Her beautiful posture of a golden rooster standing on one leg had finally gotten rid of the heat. But there was no way he could take a shower while standing on one leg like this. Perverted almighty. Couldn't they give her a more normal hot spring? She really wanted to quickly go to bed after soaking. Ning Xuema steeled her heart and wanted to go back to the shore. She might as well take a bath by the shore and not fight with this lousy hot spring anymore. Just as she turned around, she heard a voice by her ear. After entering the water, use the fire melting skill to circulate the fire psychokinesis in your body. This voice belonged to the Almighty. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She was still naked. In a state of shock, she subconsciously sank her body into the water with a splash. Just as she entered the water, she felt so hot that she wanted to jump up. Chapter 880. Ning Xuema recalled that Di Zun had mentioned the fire melting technique, and she immediately activated it. Under the scorching heat outside, she activated the technique at an unprecedented speed. Strangely enough, as soon as the fire melting technique started to circulate in her body, the scorching heat immediately disappeared. After a full cycle, she no longer felt the scorching heat. Instead, she felt warm and comfortable. It was several times better than soaking in a normal hot spring. She heaved a sigh of relief and opened her eyes to see where the Almighty was guiding her. But just as she opened her eyes, the fire melting technique in her body naturally stopped. And with this pause, she immediately felt the scorching heat again. She hurriedly closed her eyes and activated the technique again. Strangely enough, when she activated the technique, not only was the surrounding water temperature normal, she could also feel a faint heat flow from the water into her body. Although she had dual spiritual roots, the wood spiritual root in her body was getting stronger and stronger. On the other hand, the fire spiritual root was not moving at all. She had previously tried to cultivate the fire element, but she had never succeeded. The fire spiritual root was pitifully short. Usually, when she activated it, the most it could do was to provide warmth. There were no other major functions. But now, the heat from the hot spring began to enter her body as she activated the fire melting technique. It slowly revolved around the fire spiritual root in her body. After 2 full cycles, she used her inner vision to take a look. She was pleasantly surprised to find that her fire spiritual root was much brighter. The fire spiritual root was originally dim, but now it was bright red like a coral. It seemed that this hot spring was very effective for cultivating the fire element psychokinesis. This was a place with good feng shui. Di-Zun had brought Shuama here for her own good. Why didn't she see such a place with good feng shui before? Could it be that she was in some kind of enchantment? She was slightly distracted. This distraction was fine, but the fire melting technique in her body stopped operating again. The scorching heat attacked her, and she almost jumped up again. Does it feel good to be scalded? Shinjuli's voice traveled to her ears again, with a hint of teasing, or do you like the feeling of being scalded? Ning Shuamo, she knew that Di-Zun was teasing her for being distracted. This guy's words were always poisonous. He obviously said it for her own good, but he kept attacking her self-esteem. Even when she was slightly distracted, he could see it. Where exactly was he staring at her? How much could he see? Although most of her body was submerged in the water, with only her neck exposed, the water was super transparent. She had opened her eyes to see it once. Looking down from the water's surface, the scenery below could be seen at a glance. Ning Shuama wanted to tell Di-Zun to hurry up and go do your things, don't stare here. He was staring at her, she was under pressure. If she knew it earlier, she would. She even began to consider whether she should go ashore to get a dutu to wear. In this kind of situation, Shuama couldn't help but be distracted. If she was distracted, she would be scalded. But if she went ashore to get her clothes, she would be exposed. Thinking of her clothes, she thought of a more serious problem. She was directly carried here by Di-Zun, and she didn't have a change of clothes. His original clothes had been soaked in sweat a few times and smelled a little strange. He couldn't wear them anymore. Can't calm your heart. The ancestor's voice came again, this time from behind her. Chapter 881. Ning Shuama was shocked and almost jumped up. She turned around in the water and said, "You," however, when she turned around halfway, a hand was placed on her shoulder and said, "Don't move. Do you want me to look in front of you?" Ning Shuama was speechless. She wanted to cry. "Master, Almighty, can you let me have a good bath?" "Master." She reminded him of his identity again. She wanted to say something, but the heat immediately hit her and made her choke on her words. She hurriedly channeled her energy again. Good girl, Shinjuli's voice was still slow. I'll help you channel your energy. Don't be distracted again. His palm was pressed against her bare back, and a wisp of cold air entered Shuama's body, helping her to resist the scorching heat. With him channeling his energy behind her back, Shuama could finally speak. Almighty, I can actually take a bath by myself. You can go ahead first if you have something to do. He was also in the water and his body was very close to hers. She could even smell the unique light fragrance on his body. His palm was pressed on her back, making her inexplicably nervous and her heart beat faster. Me? He repeated, and his voice was slightly higher at the end. He added, although I'm very busy, you're too easy to get into trouble. I'm afraid that once I turn around, you'll be dizzy again. So, no matter how busy I am, I can only stay here and watch. Ning Shuama was speechless. She looked at her naked body and thought about the scenery behind her back. She was a little confused. Master, we shouldn't touch each other, let alone look at each other's naked bodies. Dizun responded and shamelessly asked, what do you mean by, don't touch each other? He was so knowledgeable, how could he not know what, don't touch each other, meant? Ning Shuama was speechless. She gritted her teeth and said, it means that men and women can't have physical contact. Even if they pass something to each other, they can't touch each other's skin. I see. The ancestor acted as if he had just been taught a lesson. Suddenly, a brocade handkerchief appeared out of nowhere and placed it under his palm. All right, let's not touch each other. Ning Shuama. She almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Why didn't she realize that the usually lofty ancestor was so thick-skinned? Master, have you always taught your disciples like this? Ning Shuama secretly gritted her teeth. She was being teased, by her cold master at that. You're an exception. Shinjuli answered indifferently and added, after all, you are the only one who is destined to be alone. You are the only one who became a concubine first and then a disciple. Master, I remember that you hate relationships between master and disciple. Ning Shuama reminded him. Yes, I didn't like it at first. The ancestor answered honestly. That was just how he was. Even when he didn't care, he would still abide by the rules of the secular world. But once he cared, all the rules in this world were fleeting clouds to him. Ning Shuama understood the meaning behind his words. Master, do you mean that you like her now? When I meet a suitable disciple, it's not a bad idea to have a relationship between master and disciple. Shinjuli answered naturally, as if he was eating cabbage. Ning Shuama. Her heart skipped a beat. She couldn't understand the Almighty's thoughts. Almighty, a relationship between master and disciple is taboo. Aren't you afraid of being criticized by the world? I do my own thing. Who has time to care about other people's mouths? Shinjuli asked back. Well, although the style was different, she could be sure that it was him. It wasn't because of the appearance, but because of the feeling. Her feelings had always been accurate. She was stubborn. It looks fake. After all, you have a substitute. Do you think I'm still a substitute? Shinjuli narrowed his eyes dangerously. That's hard to say. Ning Shuama purposely angered him. However, as soon as she finished speaking, her body was suddenly pulled by a force. She couldn't help but fall back into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her slightly opened red lips. The familiar breath that made her heart palpitate rushed to her face. Ning Shuama was forced to tilt her head back slightly. He fixed one hand on her waist and the other hand on her chin. He kissed her thoroughly. Chapter 883. Ning Shuama's head exploded. She wanted to struggle and push him away, but her hands were powerless. Her heart was beating like a drum, and her body was weak. She almost collapsed in his arms. His kiss seemed to have a hallucinogenic effect. Ning Xuema's usually smart brain went blank, and she couldn't remember anything for a while. This passionate kiss lasted for a long time. After about 5 to 6 minutes, the sound of water splashing could be heard. Finally, Ning Xuema was startled back to her senses. Then, she realized what kind of scene she was in. She bent her body like a bow, which inevitably exposed her chest. At this moment, she was naked. When he kissed her, his eyes must have taken advantage of her tofu. This position, that scene was too beautiful. She didn't dare to imagine it. God! Too bold and unrestrained. Especially when one of his arms was still around her waist, and his palm was pressed on her lower abdomen. His little finger was slightly lower and had already touched a mysterious area. Bang! Ning Xuema's face turned red. She pushed him away and wanted to push him away again, but with her current strength, she was no match for him. Not only did she not push him away, but she also fell into his arms. Xuemo. The Dizun hugged her tightly. There seemed to be a faint flame in the depths of his eyes. The eyes of the girl in his arms were watery, her face was red, and her lips were moist like cherry blossoms. He didn't know if it was because she was soaking in the hot spring water or because she was nervous and shy, but her whole body was pale pink. Her skin was like fine porcelain, smooth to the touch. She was lying in his arms like this. Even if Lu Xiaohui was alive, he would not be able to control himself. Shinjiuli's palms suddenly became hot. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed her tightly against his body. Xuemo. His voice was slightly hoarse. Although he was still wearing a robe, Ning Xuema was still in his arms and could feel the obvious changes in his body. God, he wouldn't want to take her here, right? Ning Xuema's face became hotter, and her heart became more flustered. She couldn't help but struggle. Shinjuli's breathing became heavier when she did not move. Don't move! He shouted. His body was burning hot. Ning Xuema was in his arms, and her face was even hotter. Fortunately, he seemed to be naturally adapted to the hot spring. Xuema lay in his arms and could no longer feel the heat of the hot spring, but her heart felt like it was about to jump out. Let me go first. She had originally wanted to reprimand him, but in the end, not only did her voice sound a little hoarse, it also trembled as if she was acting coquettishly. Ning Xuema was also stunned when she said it herself, and her face became hot again. Shinjuli coughed and attributed his abnormal behavior to the fact that she was not wearing clothes and was not as confident as usual. Xuema, hurry up and level up. Shinjuli's breathing was somewhat unstable. He was born without any desires, but he did not expect that after he met her, he would have the desire of a normal man. He wanted to have her, he wanted to rub her into his body. That kind of desire was something he had never experienced before. However, there was an inexplicable familiar feeling that made him dazed for a moment. In his life, he rarely controlled his emotions. He was more carefree and did whatever he wanted. Basically, he would do whatever he wanted and would not let himself suffer. But now, he had to control himself. For the sake of the future, he had to control himself. Shinjiuli secretly took a breath. Chapter 884. Shinjiuli finally let go of her, but he was afraid that she would jump up from the heat again, so he slid his palm onto Xuemo's back. Be obedient and adjust your breathing according to my instructions. It will be very beneficial for you. After experiencing such a passionate kiss and a hot hug, Ning Xuemo felt that his presence was even stronger now that he was behind her. Especially when his palm was still burning, and the warmth seemed to be directly transmitted to her heart. Great God, I can do it myself. Ning Xuemo wanted him to leave. Stop talking nonsense. With me here, you'll be able to adapt faster. The ancestor regained his calm tone. He was used to being high and mighty, so he spoke with a condescending tone. Ning Xuema's body stiffened slightly, and she turned to look at him. She pursed her lips, but didn't say anything. Shinjiuli probably also realized that his tone was stiff, so he coughed lightly. This hot spring is actually a bit dangerous. If you are not careful, you may be scalded. You have also been drowned before. Don't worry, I won't touch you. I will only help you heal. His gaze fell on Xuema's leg under the water. There was still a faint scar there. Although it had already healed, it was still a serious injury, so the new flesh and skin inside was still different from the normal skin around it. During the fight, Ning Xuema's mind was extremely tense and momentarily forgot about the injuries on her body. Now that her mind had completely relaxed, she felt that her muscles were tired and aching. It was as if all the bones in her body had been disassembled. It was rare for him to explain so much, and Ning Xuema's heart moved. She was indeed afraid of being drowned, so after hearing him say so, she didn't say anything else. She used to be a person who was used to bossing others around, but after coming to this world, she frequently tasted the malice of the world, which changed her temperament a little. For example, right now, she didn't want to fight for something that didn't exist. She closed her eyes, gathered her thoughts, and began to circulate her energy according to the methods he said. After channeling her energy, she finally realized the benefits of having the Almighty behind her. The psyche power that he transferred to her was controlled very well. It was neither too big nor too small, and it was just right to follow her own nashi and wander in her body. Wherever it passed, it was like dry land being watered by sweet dew. Her tight muscles finally relaxed and felt very comfortable. After 3 circulations, Ning Xuema's fatigue had mostly disappeared, and the soreness in her injured muscles had also eased a lot. After all, she had been risking her life for too long. After soaking in the hot spring for a while, she was so sleepy that she couldn't open her eyes. Her head was nodding, and she looked like she was about to fall asleep at any moment. Tired and sleepy. Sleep if you're sleepy. Shinjiuli gently stroked her hair with his other hand. I'll sleep when I get back. Ning Xuema mumbled. She didn't dare to sleep. It was very dangerous to sleep in the water. He might drown again. I'm here. I won't let you drown. I'm afraid. Ning Xuema was actually very sleepy, but she still forced herself to talk. It was as if she had one eye open even in her sleep. What are you afraid of? Why are you still afraid when I'm here? Shinjiuli's voice was a little deep. Yes, I shouldn't be afraid when you're here. Her voice gradually became softer. It was obvious that she was so sleepy that she couldn't find her bearings. But what? But you'll leave me behind. I don't want to be left behind again. I said before. I have to rely on myself for everything. Chapter 885. Shinjiuli's fingers trembled slightly. He naturally knew what Ning Xuema meant. That time when Yi Qinghuan captured her, she waited bitterly for reinforcements. Although these memories had been forcibly removed by him, the shadow remained in her bones. It made her subconsciously not trust anyone. This was not something that could be removed in a short period of time. It could only be done slowly. Shinjiuli secretly sighed and whispered, "Don't worry, it won't happen. I don't like to be forced. You have to respect my opinion." Ning Xuema muttered again. Shinjiuli's eyes moved slightly. He paused for a moment and said, "Okay." He knew that Xuema had always been a very opinionated girl. She was also the only person on the continent who dared to raise conditions in front of him. He was the most powerful person on the continent. He didn't like to explain anything. He was used to using the fastest means to solve things. He rarely considered other people's feelings. And after treating her this way, it seemed to have caused a lot of unnecessary conflicts. While they were talking, Ning Xuema took a nap in the water. Her body swayed. Fortunately, Shinjiuli was behind her and supported her in time. She didn't plunge into the water. Shinjiuli couldn't help but want to laugh. He also felt a little distressed. He was stunned. I actually have this kind of distressed feeling. This made him feel very strange. It was also the first time that he saw Xuema so sleepy. It was obvious that she had been working very hard these 2 days. Ning Xuema also came back to her senses. She suddenly pinched herself to make herself more energetic. She forced her eyelids open. I'd better go back to sleep, since she insisted. Shinjiuli didn't force her. Okay. He took her hand and walked to the shore. You go. Ning Xuema hugged her chest and squatted on the ground. She came back to her senses. Your clothes are here. Dizun pointed to a big rock next to him. Sure enough, there was a brand new set of clothes on it. Ning Xuema quickly and efficiently put on the clothes. Finally, she had some confidence. She looked all around her, but all she could see were bright red trees. She couldn't see the end of the trees. She didn't know where to go. Shinjiuli held her hand and said, "Close your eyes." Ning Xuema felt relieved after leaving the water. As expected, he closed his eyes. Shinjiuli pulled her into his arms. As the wind blew past her ears, she felt as if her body was floating in the clouds. A moment later, Shinjiuli appeared in the bedroom with Xuema in his arms. All right, open your eyes. For a long time, there was still no movement. Shinjiuli lowered his head to look at her in his arms. He saw that her eyelashes were slightly closed and her breathing was shallow. She had actually fallen asleep. He couldn't help but smile. His palm gently rubbed her hair. Her hair was still wet, but after being rubbed by him, it was dry. He was about to put her on his bed when he suddenly seemed to realize something. He turned around and appeared in the side hall where she used to live. He put her on the bed and covered her with a quilt. He stood there and looked at her for a moment before turning around and leaving. Inside a room that seemed to be made of ice, a man in white was sitting on a futon. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to notice something. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the man in white who flashed in the door. He slowly stood up and bowed. The man in white was Shinjiuli. He looked down at the man in white. His eyes were like snow. Do you know your crime? The man in white had the same figure as Shinjiuli. When they both wore masks, they looked like the same person. Chapter 886. The man in white was Dizun's substitute. Even in his own room, he wore a mask. When he heard Shinjiuli's question, he raised his head slightly and said, "Supreme Divinity, if you don't accept her as your disciple, I have a feeling that she might be your origin tribulation. Do I need you to tell me who I want to accept as my disciple?" Shinjiuli's voice turned cold. "Supreme Divinity. She is not worth it." The man in white was unwilling to give up and wanted to persuade him again. Boom! Shinjiuli suddenly raised his sleeve, and a light red wave flashed and shrouded the man in white. The man in white seemed to be tortured, and his whole body trembled slightly. Shinjiuli's voice was as cold as snow. "Wumo, you have crossed the line." The man in white finally bowed down and said, You have been following me for more than 2,000 years, and you have always been very reliable. Therefore, I trust you and use you." What did I tell you before I went into seclusion? Say it again. Shinjuli's eyes were shining. The man in white paused and finally said slowly, Supreme Divinity told me to take good care of Miss Ning and prepare the food that Supreme Divinity has already planned for her. I will take her out of the dark forest and let her become your disciple openly. If I disobey, I will be punished by being imprisoned in the soul-grinding valley for a year, Shinjuli said lightly. In that case, you can go and accept your punishment. He turned around and was about to leave. Supreme Divinity, I don't mind the punishment, but I want to say that this woman is most likely the origin tribulation of Supreme Divinity. You must be careful of her. Shinjuli turned around slowly. He looked at Shinjuli's face coldly and said, My fate is not determined by the heavens. You talk too much. He waved his sleeve again, and the light red light around Wu Mo suddenly tightened. Wu Mo's throat hurt, and his voice was broken. Go and accept your punishment. Shinjuli said and turned around to leave. Wu Mo slowly sat down on the cattail hassock and closed his eyes slightly. This was the first time he had received such a big punishment since he started following the ancestor. However, this was an oath he had made to the ancestor long ago. Now that he had violated the oath, it was only natural for him to be punished. He had already expected this outcome, so he wasn't surprised. However, he did not regret it. If he could do it all over again, he would do it again. After he sat down, he formed a seal with his fingertips. A moment later, a whirlpool that seemed to contain countless weapons appeared in the void. The whirlpool slowly pressed down on him and gradually swallowed his entire body. He was nowhere to be seen in the ice room. The black gas in the soul-grinding valley surged violently. Every wisp of black gas was a rope that would tightly bind him inside. Every night, he would suffer the pain of the black gas pouring into his head. That feeling was like being skinned alive. It was abnormally painful. He would not be free unless he left the valley. After Wu Mo disappeared, Shinjuli reappeared in the ice room. He stood there and looked at the place where Wu Mo had disappeared. His eyes were faintly complicated. A moment later, he turned around and left. Ning Xuemo had a good sleep. She slept from early in the morning until the sun set. When she woke up, the sky was already filled with stars. She opened her eyes and saw the bed curtain in front of her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked around again. The room was decorated in a very familiar way. This was the side hall where she used to live, and not the ancestor's bedroom. Ning Xuemo's memory was still stuck at the moment when the ancestor carried her back to the room after soaking in the hot spring. Chapter 887. Ning Xuemo thought that Di Zun would directly carry her back to his palace, but it turned out that he sent her to his own side chamber. This was a bit out of her expectations, but it also made her feel relieved. Her current identity was special, and if she really slept on the same bed with him, she would feel very uncomfortable. She first sensed her body. After all, she was too tired, and her body was still sore. Fortunately, she didn't feel that kind of soreness after resting. It seemed that soaking in the hot spring was still very beneficial. Then, she sensed the psychokinesis in her body. She was pleasantly surprised to find that the fire spiritual root was much thicker than before. It was originally only the size of a little finger, but now it was as thick and long as a middle finger. She estimated that if she cultivated for a few more days, it would level up. And the wood spiritual root was even more luxuriant, green like jade. Looking internally, it was more than 2 feet long, and it looked very pleasing to the eye. According to this momentum, if she cultivated for another 8 to 10 days, she estimated that she would be able to level up to Earth rank level 3. She finally got rid of her identity as a good-for-nothing. She finally got rid of her identity as a concubine. Ha ha ha, from now on, she would create her own world. Ning Xuema's heart was filled with joy. She couldn't help but dance a few steps on the bed. Then, with a spin, she landed on the ground. She looked at the clothes on her body. She was too tired this morning, so she almost closed her eyes and put on the clothes without looking at the style. Now, she could see that the style of the clothes was very simple, but it was very fitting. It was soft and comfortable to wear. It was very obvious that this was an ancient version of pajamas. She washed up and opened a closet in the room. She found that there was actually a neat stack of new clothes inside. There were all kinds of colors, fiery red, light blue, light pink. It was too much for Ning Xuema's eyes to take in. Did the great god prepare this for her? Xuema's heart was filled with a warm feeling. She picked a set, put it on neatly, and ran out of the side chamber. She was hungry, so she wanted to find something to eat. While she was at it, she also wanted to greet the great god. After all, he was now her master, so she should still have the proper etiquette. Just as she stepped out of the door, her feet paused. In the twilight, Shinjioli was sitting at a small table under a grape trellis in her courtyard. There was tea and pastries on the table. He was sitting there drinking tea. He was not wearing a mask. The wind lifted his long hair and the corners of his robe, making them flutter. When he saw Ning Xuema come out, he looked her up and down. "You look good." He then gestured to the seat opposite him with his chin. "Sit." Ning Xuema sat down across from him. She thought of his injuries and looked at his complexion. He didn't look too bad. His lips were red and his teeth were white. It seemed that he had fully recovered after a few days of seclusion. Ning Xuema was finally relieved. She looked at the pastries on the table. They were sparkling and fragrant. It was even steaming. She didn't need to taste it. Just by smelling it, she knew that these pastries were her dishes and that they suited her taste. She looked at Shinjioli, who was sitting opposite her. He was drinking tea and had no intention of eating the pastries. Obviously, he had prepared them for her. Her heart warmed again. These pastries are not bad. As she spoke, she felt even hungrier. She raised her hand to take a piece, but Shinjioli took out a white jade flute from nowhere and held it against her wrist. Her hand could no longer move. Ning Xuema looked at him in confusion. He didn't want her to eat. Shinjioli said lightly, "This is a prize. You can't eat it now." "What prize?" Ning Xuema was surprised. Chapter 888. Shinjioli raised his sleeves, and a chessboard appeared on the table. "If you win, you can eat a piece of cake." Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. "What if I lose?" She didn't have much chance of winning against him, so she had to ask first. "You haven't even played yet, and you're already asking if you lose. Is that all you have?" Ning Xuema didn't fall for his provocation. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. "It's better to be straightforward. It's very simple. If you win, you can eat a piece of cake. If I win, you have to answer one of my questions truthfully. It seems that I'm at a disadvantage. If I win, I'll get a piece of cake. If I win, I want a plate of cakes." Ning Xuema's gaze fell on the cakes. Each of them was small, like dice, and not enough to fill the gaps between her teeth. A plate was more like it. "Are you bargaining with me?" The ancestor smiled. "If you win, you can eat 3 cakes. However, if you lose, not only do you have to answer one of my questions, but you also have to give me a small reward." The ancestor also wants a reward. She had nothing on her, and even the clothes she was wearing were prepared for her by him. The ancestor had already arranged the chessboard and handed the black agate pieces to her. Don't worry, the reward is something you can give at any time. It's very easy. Then it's still not worth it. If I win, you have to allow me to ask a question. This little girl really didn't want to lose out at all. The ancestor chuckled and tapped the chessboard with his finger. All right. It's up to you. After discussing the conditions, the two sat opposite each other and played chess. Once they entered the game, Ning Xuemo was fully focused. She didn't dare to be distracted. In the game, the Almighty didn't give in to her at all. If she didn't pay attention, she would fall into his trap. The great god treated her as a real opponent to kill, and Ning Xuemo was not someone who would give way to others. This game of chess lasted for more than 2 hours before the dust settled. Ning Xuemo lost by a difference of 2 suns. Ning Xuemo was also someone who was willing to admit defeat. What do you want to ask? Why didn't you use the sound-transmitting talisman I gave you when you were in danger? The ancestor's question was super simple. You must have been seriously injured when you suddenly disappeared. You needed to go into seclusion to heal your wounds. It's taboo to be disturbed while you're in seclusion. Besides, I also want to win this battle with my own abilities, Ning Xuemo answered straightforwardly. Shinjiu Lu's eyes flickered slightly. So you are mainly afraid of disturbing me. There seemed to be a smile on his lips as he beckoned to her. Come here. Ning Xuemo looked at him warily. What are you doing? Shinjiuli's gaze fell on the space between her eyebrows, as if he was thinking, that space between your eyebrows, there seems to be something wrong. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat. Between her eyebrows, there was a cinnabar mole that represented a heavenly marriage. Now, something was wrong. Could it be that after she became his disciple, she was no longer his concubine, so that cinnabar mole disappeared? She couldn't help but raise her hands to touch it, but she didn't feel anything unusual. The cinnabar mole was still there. Great God, wasn't our engagement cancelled? Why is it still there? Shinjiuli tapped on the chessboard lightly. Good question. When you win, I can answer you this as a reward. He simply stood up, walked in front of her, and pulled her up. His eyes stared at her forehead. Ning Xuemo was scared by his stare. What's going on? Before she could finish her words, Shinjiuli pulled her into his arms and pressed his warm lips on her forehead. Ning Xuemo only felt a heat on her forehead, as if a wisp of electric current had entered, which made her heart jump. She subconsciously pushed him. You. Chapter 889. Unexpectedly, Di Zun let go of her easily this time. He turned around and sat back in front of his seat. Just a small reward. So this was the reward he wanted. Ning Xuemo touched her forehead. The cinnabar mole didn't hurt or itch, so she didn't feel anything unusual. She looked at him suspiciously. Guru, you didn't do anything wrong, right? Shinjiuli looked at her lazily. What do you want me to do when I kiss your forehead? He muttered, or, you actually want me to do something wrong? Ning Xuemo was speechless. Guru, you've lost your integrity. Forget it, it's just a kiss on the forehead. This reward isn't too much. However, she seemed to be even hungrier. She even made a grumbling sound. The sound was loud enough that Ning Xuemo felt a little uncomfortable. She wanted him to hear it, but at the same time, she didn't want him to hear it. She was really hungry. Shinjiuli didn't seem to hear it. Instead, he slowly ate 3 pieces of pastries. Then, he knocked on the chessboard with his hand. Second game. He really didn't want to be flexible. Ning Xuemo's stubborn temper also rose. She took a deep breath, her nose pointed to her mouth, and her mouth pointed to her heart, suppressing her hunger. The two of them started the second game. This time, Ning Xuema played very carefully. In order to fill her stomach, she went all out. She used all her skills. After all, she was hungry, and there were pastries beside her constantly attracting her attention. After half an hour, she lost again by a single piece. As a result, Ning Xuema looked on helplessly as he ate another 3 pieces of pastries. While he was at it, he leisurely kissed the tip of her nose and answered his rather perverted question. Have you missed me these days? Although she was willing to accept her loss, Ning Xuema's heart was still a bit angry. Therefore, she smiled and replied with a satisfied tone, yes, I do. I really do. Although Shinjiuli was used to being expressionless, at this moment, his pair of blue eyes flashed with a faint smile. Obviously, he was very satisfied with her answer. Ning Xuema added, I want to know how you developed such a perverted personality. Shinjiuli was speechless. The smile in his eyes disappeared. He knocked on the chessboard with his finger. Continue. In the third game, Shinjiuli suddenly changed his usual style of chess. His attacks were fierce and merciless. Especially his momentum in the game, it was extremely oppressive. Ning Xuema was startled by his sudden change in chess style. Furthermore, the invisible aura emitted from his body made her unable to breathe. Her heartbeat inexplicably thundered. Thus, she lost again. She lost by 4 or 5 stones. After this game of chess, Ning Xuema felt as if she had fought a tough battle. Coupled with her hunger, beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Thus, she watched as the 3 pieces of pastries entered his mouth, and the fire in her heart started to burn. She was going to starve to death. Could it be that the Almighty would not go easy on her at all? Even a piece of cake to fill her stomach would be good. This time, Shinjiuli kissed her on the cheek. Ning Xuema's face was expressionless as she allowed him to kiss her. The first 2 times he kissed her, she was a little nervous. This time, it was different. Shinjiuli looked at her expression. Are you angry? I didn't. Ning Xuema replied stiffly. It's good that you're not angry. Then, answer me a question. You. He was about to ask the third question. Ning Xuema interrupted him. You've already asked. You can't ask anymore. Shinjiuli paused for a moment and smiled. He did not smile easily, but this smile was like a flower blooming. Okay, I'll take it that I asked. Chapter 890. Ning Xuema was dazzled by his smile. Then, she looked away and fell on the remaining 3 pieces of pastries on the table. She calmed herself down and said, again. She didn't believe that she would keep losing. She didn't believe that she couldn't eat a piece of pastry. Playing chess is like practicing martial arts. The most important thing to avoid is being impatient. No matter what situation you encounter, you must remember not to mess up your position, Shinjiuli suddenly said. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Her fingers squeezed the agate chess piece tightly as she thought about her next move. She was particularly cautious in this game. She advanced step by step and didn't give in at all. This game of chess took a long time to play. Ning Xuema hadn't eaten for a day. She played chess until midnight. Although she had been holding it in, her stomach didn't live up to her expectations. From time to time, it would growl to remind her of its existence. In the quiet night, the sound was very clear. Ning Xuema was embarrassed and angry. She inhaled and exhaled to suppress the hunger that was getting more and more serious. After her stomach growled again, Shinjiuli finally looked at her and said with a faint smile, "Do you want me to give you a handicap?" Ning Xuema was also stubborn, "No need. You're ambitious." Shinjiuli nodded his head and praised her. It was a compliment. He didn't show any mercy this time. He also gave his all. If he was serious about playing chess, no one would be his opponent. Rongyu Ishanlin couldn't either. The reason why he occasionally lost to Rongyu Ishanlin once or twice was because he was afraid that Rongyu Ishanlin would lose too badly and never play with him again. Therefore, the old Dizun played chess casually. Once he got serious, his opponent would only be defeated by him. Most of the time, he played chess for fun. Because his chess skills were too good, it wasn't easy for him to cultivate Rongyu Ishanlin, an opponent who could play chess with him. Therefore, he valued this friend very much. Shinjioli thought that he wouldn't meet a second opponent who could make him serious, but he didn't expect to meet such a freak like Ning Xuemo. Her chess skills were so high at such a young age. As long as he was distracted for a moment, she would have the opportunity to take a few bites from him. Thus, after he witnessed Ning Xuemo's chess skills at Rongyue Tianlan's Carefree Island, he had the idea of training her as a chess opponent. This way, once his chess addiction kicked in, he wouldn't have to travel thousands of miles to find Rongyue Tianlan to PK. When the game was about to end, Shinjioli raised his eyes to look at her tense little face. His fingers paused slightly, and for the first time, he began to consider whether he should give her a handicap. Firstly, he didn't like to eat this kind of pastry, and he was a little sick of it after eating a few pieces. Secondly, if this little girl didn't eat a single piece, she might really get angry, but there is no father and son on the chessboard. Naturally, there was no lover on the chessboard. She had just said that giving in on the chessboard was a sign of disrespect to the opponent. Forget it, I won't allow it. It was rare to meet someone who could make him use all his energy to play chess. How could he not play to his heart's content? And so, in the end, Ning Xuemo lost by a single piece. You lost. The Dizun raised his head. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath and stood up. Yes, I lost. Congratulations. She looked up at the sky. It was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. She had played chess with the great god for nearly an entire night for the sake of pastries, but in the end, she had completely lost. She didn't even get a single piece of pastry in her mouth. She had smelled the flavor of pastries all night for nothing. Yes, one must be willing to accept defeat. There was no such thing as father and son on the chessboard. Chapter 891. She knew that there was no such thing as father and son in a game of chess. However, there was still a fire burning in her heart. She felt wronged. She took another deep breath and turned to leave. She wanted to go down Tianyin Peak to look for food. She was starving. Wait. Shinjioli stopped her from behind. Is there anything else? Ning Xuemo didn't even want to turn her head. You haven't fulfilled your bet. Shinjioli did things by the book. Ning Xuemo was speechless. The fire in her heart burned even brighter. She turned around and said, "Okay, I'll fulfill my bet." She deliberately didn't look at the remaining 3 pieces of pastries, lest she couldn't help but pick them up and slap them on his face. Shinjioli looked at her angry face. It seemed that she was really angry. He raised his hand and picked up a piece of pastry. I can give you a piece of pastry, but you have to take the initiative to kiss me. Ning Xuemo paused and pursed her lips. In your dreams. You really don't want it. Humph. Don't regret it. Shinjioli spoke slowly. Don't. This time, Ning Xuemo's tone became heavier. Then forget it. Shinjioli didn't force her and slowly ate the remaining 3 pieces. Ning Xuemo saw that he really ate it, and the fire in her heart was about to burn into magma. The grievance in her heart surged, and she tightly closed her mouth. She didn't know why, but she had a faint sense of familiarity with this scene. Di-Zun didn't want to let her go. This pastry is made of 1,000-year-old Solomon's seal. Eating one piece can increase your psychokinesis by at least 10 years. He didn't start to explain the effect of the pastry until now. Ning Xuema was speechless. She clenched her fingers in her sleeves. However, to be able to get a piece of this pastry by kissing me once, this transaction couldn't be more profitable, but you gave up this opportunity in a fit of pique. Xuema, this isn't like you. The ancestor's eyes rested on her. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't a person who got angry easily. No matter what she encountered, she could calmly analyze the situation and then choose the most beneficial to herself. She had never been angry with anyone before because she felt that this kind of behavior was somewhat childish. She also didn't think that there would be a day when she would be so childish. It was reasonable to say that Di-Zun hadn't gone overboard in his actions. If she had encountered this kind of situation in the past, Ning Xuema would never have chosen to act rashly. She could either give him a kiss or laugh it off. But now, she was angry, and she didn't regret it at all. What did this mean? She couldn't figure it out for a moment. She focused all her attention on suppressing her boiling anger. That was why she kept a straight face and didn't say anything. Shenjiuli clapped his hands and brushed off the pastry crumbs. He walked to her step by step. He was tall, and when they stood facing each other, Xuema's figure seemed particularly petite. Then I'll ask you a question. Do you like me? He finally asked the question he cared about the most. He knew that Ning Xuema didn't hate him, but he really didn't know whether she liked him or not, or whether she loved him or not. He really couldn't feel it. Ning Xuema froze, but then she smiled and glanced at him. Di-Zun, you already asked me a question, so I won't answer this question. Shenjiuli was stunned. What did he ask? Ning Xuema reminded him, you just asked me if I really didn't want it. My answer was no. That counted. Shenjiuli was stunned.